a gentleman from the US, Dr. Ashley Stevens, who was previously with the Boston University and Dana-Farber Institute, uh, Dr. Richard Cahoon, who was with Cornell University heading their tech transfer, and also he is currently an adjunct professor there, and Mr. John Fraser, who has been heading tech transfer in the past with Florida State and also the Simon Fraser University. A lot of experience, and all of them have been on the board of directors of Autumn, which is the U.S. Association for University Technology Managers, and two of them, that's Ashley and John, have also been presidents of Autumn in the past as well. So a lot of experience, and they have shared a lot of insights today. Of course, we'll continue to the next few days. Professor Krishnan, I wanted to actually invite you here, but I knew that this half an hour kind of a thing is not going to be good enough for. We should bring you here some other time to do a longer interaction with some of our startups as well. So thank you very much for agreeing to speak. Just for the benefit of all the colleagues here, um, I just wanted to point out that Professor Krishnan is the director of the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, which is the top institute of management in the country. He is a professor of strategy, innovation, and I know he's also headed entrepreneurship in the institute before. He's also been the previous director of IIM Indore and also helped set up IIM Sambalpur and so he's been very important as also an institution builder in the country as well, besides, of course, the kind of work that he does in his research and consulting. I must also point out that he's very keenly interested in innovation. He's been studying this for many years. In fact, his PhD work, so he came back after his master's in Stanford. He's an IIT alumnus before that, and then came back to do a PhD in IIM Ahmedabad, which focused on some of the research institutions in India. And he did look at CSIR in depth at that time as well. And since then, he has, of course, been on several high-level boards and committees in the nation, which have been reviewing progress and also advising on what needs to be done in some of these institutions as well, okay, in terms of redirection of this. I think the last one which happened was for CSIR itself, which I know where there was a process of rethinking how it should be reorganized, and that he was involved with. But also BIRAC, he's involved on committees for BIRAC as well. So we're happy to have him here, and he can share his views. He's also a popular author. He has written 2 books. Some of you might have seen it in the bookshops, and those some of you are not, one book is listed here, the other one is not, okay? Oh, it is? Yeah, so I think you will get to hear from Dr. Krishnan himself. So over to you, Dr. Krishnan. Thank you very much. I will unshare and I'll let you share, please. Yeah.
Sure.
Yes, I can see it full screen. No problems. I will
Good.
off my video for a moment. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, thanks a lot for inviting me. I'd like to appreciate Dr. Premnath's invitation. And in fact, it's the other way around. I think he's the one who really understands tech transfer very well. In fact, whenever I need to understand something better, I usually reach out to him. But anyway, let me share what I had in mind for this evening. So I'm taking a slightly broader perspective because tech transfer happens in a context. And I think that context is important. So I'm going to talk about going from lab to market challenges in the Indian context. So I'm going to just talk about what I feel are some of the really critical issues we need to look at if we finally want to make innovation and commercialization and tech transfer successful. So the first important question I think we should be asking when we look at tech transfer is, are we solving the right problems? I thought I'll give you an example of a couple of companies. These are startups which did sort of have their own very strong discovery phase where they were trying to invent something new. This is a company called Cloud Physician. It essentially tries to create a virtual management system for an intensive care unit. And this is basically through telemedicine. The problem they were trying to solve was actually a quite an interesting problem that many hospitals have ICU facilities, but they don't have the intensivists or the critical manpower which is required to manage an ICU effectively. So their solution was to create this remote kind of ICU management system. Of course, it started with some challenges, but then it actually came to life during COVID-19 when there was a lack of ICU capacity due to inadequate availability of those intensivists. And there was a significant increase in demand for ICU beds. And that's when Cloud Physician came into its own and was able to really solve this problem. So we have been in our work trying to underline the importance of this pain wave waste approach that is essentially trying to solve problems which have these three characteristics. They represent a significant pain point for users. They represent a wave or trend which essentially is current and will provide the momentum for the innovation to succeed. And basically, they're addressing an important issue of waste, and it's this addressing the waste issue which actually makes the innovation much more worthwhile. So we have been advocating this pain wave waste as a kind of important basis for identifying problems for innovation. A lot of the problems in tech transfer come later because maybe the problem was not defined well. And that's really the point I'm trying to make in this context. Just giving you another example of a startup called Vigyan Labs, which was founded a little over a decade ago. Once again, solving a very important problem that data centers are guzzlers of power. Of course, the trend is computing shifting to the cloud, and cloud means data center. But once again, what this company, Vigyan Labs, tried to do was to reduce the power wastage in the data center by reducing power consumption by up to about 30%. So particularly for institutions and for scientists and for startups, I feel it's important that there is a much more attention paid to identifying the problem, because if you identify the problem correctly, then your chances of ultimately commercializing a technology or an invention become much higher. There's also a sort of utility of looking at things with a platform perspective. Recently, one of the companies from India which has been making the headlines is this company called iStem, which essentially is trying to create a cell therapy platform for ophthalmology. Their vision is to create a scalable cell therapy platform which can treat incurable disease and essentially provide access to these new technologies for the bottom 99% of the population. And it's their first product out of the platform is a product aimed at treating age-related macular degeneration, which is a significant problem. And in India, could be affecting, several million people. And they're trying to do this at low cost as well. And I think this is, again, a very good example of a company which is solving a very important problem. For people in the lab as well, I think one of my favorites, and I've shared this in earlier presentations, is the kind of work Bob Langer has been doing at MIT, where he puts in, right in the beginning, some very important criteria when he chooses a project to work on. So he wants his ideal research project to be based on a huge idea. It should be capable of being written up into a seminal paper establishing the science. You should be able to come up with a blocking patent so that you finally can commercialize effectively. And of course, given that he works in that particular domain, there should be in vivo studies that demonstrate the efficacy of the research. Essentially, the point I'm trying to make is that if problem definition is strong, if you're coming up with something very unique, then you actually have a much better chance of ultimately commercializing it, because there'll be more demand, and you'll also therefore have demand pull, which will help you during the commercialization phase. Now, of course, just the problems are not good enough. You also have to have the right ideas. And I think this is a challenge in India. Today, my talk is focused on the Indian context. So there's been a lot of interest in India in moving towards new drug development ever since India signed the WTO treaty in 1995. Prior to that, we were almost completely focused on process innovation and generics. And what's happened over time is it's been a real struggle to get into genuinely new molecules. Of course, there have been some examples like Syndrium, which was at least partly developed in India. This is a new treatment for malaria. And then, of course, the first Indian new chemical entity to reach the market was saroglitazar in 2013. And this, of course, was again solving a very important problem because India is often called the diabetes capital in the world. And obviously, a drug which can address both this diabetic dyslipidemia is a very important drug to bring to market. But the interesting thing is when you look at the evolution of new drug development in India, starting with the mid 90s when the WTO treaty was signed, you actually see, and this is a study, of course, of some years ago, it needs to be updated now, but this is a 2017 study. The number of compounds in development actually peaked in 2011. And that's because the large pharma companies were finding it really difficult to commercialize their drugs. They were finding the returns they were getting even on out-licensing molecules early in the cycle not sufficient to cover their costs, nor did they have the patience and resources to actually carry the molecules through to final launch. Of course, they were slowly being replaced by startups in this space. And what you see here is the similar diagram for startups, and you see them growing over time. And I think that trend has broadly continued. But what is interesting is when you look at the comparison between Indian companies and the industry average, you find that Indian companies' success rates are lower. That in itself is not surprising because India is at an early stage as far as drug development is concerned. The timelines for Indian different phases of the drug development process are also longer. But what is more interesting is when Differding, who did this study, looked at the reasons for Indians or Indian companies struggling, they really found that there were multiple reasons. They were firstly broadly spread over multiple therapeutic areas. They were really not trying first in class ideas. I think this is a challenge for Indian firms to have the courage to really look at new solutions or new ideas that have not been tried before. In other words, there was lack of novelty and lack of differentiation from existing development compounds. And this in turn was related to weaknesses in scientific education system of India and in historical deficiencies in industry academia interaction. So of course, things are changing, and in the last decade, we've seen significant improvement in the interaction between industry and academia, but these problems will not go away overnight. So having the courage as well as the conviction to be able to try out new ideas is going to be one of the challenges for Indian labs as well as Indian startups as we go forward. And of course, if you do come out with an out of the box idea, it can have its own struggles. This gentleman, Dr. Paul Raj, worked in the Indian innovation ecosystem for many years before he went abroad to the US and started working at Stanford. And something that he developed called MIMO, multiple input, multiple output, is a wireless technology that is at the heart of core 4G wireless. Of course, today we've moved on to 5G and soon to 6G. But what was interesting was when he first proposed the idea, it was questioned by a lot of people because it went against the existing paradigms in the field. Stanford tried to get wireless companies to be licensees, but very few took it up. Finally, in order to really prove the validity, importance of this technology and to prove its validity, Paul Raj had to persevere with the idea himself and build his own startup to demonstrate its potential. And that's the only way he could really finally get people who were interested in taking it on. So in this particular case, licensing involved an intermediate step of Paul Raj himself, demonstrating the utility as well as the functionality of the technology. But I would also say that an important part of it was because he was a newcomer to this field, he was able to come up with something very different that others really couldn't contemplate. Though, of course, it did pose challenges to him, but it also meant that ultimately it became a core technology of 4G wireless. Now, once we are able to get this ideation part sorted out, the next thing, of course, is do you have the right vehicles for scaling and commercialization? And that's where a lot of work related to tech transfer comes in. And I think that's what you're all discussing in this particular workshop. So I think in India, one of the challenges has been to get customers who are willing to work closely with you to commercialize. A lot of the work that was successful in NCL happened because there were large industrial companies willing to invest in process R&D and willing to, more importantly, willing to try out new processes on their plants. So if you look at one of the most successful stories of NCL, which was the whole zeolite research program headed by Dr. Paul Ratnaswamy many years ago, finally, the ability to apply it into the xylene isomerization process at Indian Petrochemicals happened because IPCL was willing to work very closely with NCL. So this just leads me to another point that, there's a lot of research that shows that it's important for firms to do R&D, even for them to be able to absorb technologies developed by others. In other words, these are complements to each other. They are not substitutes. A company that does no R&D will find it quite difficult to absorb and commercialize a technology. And that's why it's important for Indian companies, even if they don't want to be at the cutting edge of R&D, they need enough understanding of research, development, and engineering so that they can adopt technologies developed by others easily. So when you're into tech transfer in India, I think one of the important things is to evaluate very carefully what is the ability or capability of your customer to commercialize the technology you're offering them. And your choice of the licensee could be as important as the decision the licensor faces in getting the technology from you. So I think in India, we have seen a lot of interesting examples of government programs which have catalyzed this. One of the interesting programs was the Collaborative Automotive Research Program, which was launched in the early 2000s. At a time when the automobile industry was going through a lot of transition. The idea was to help things like lightweighting, being more environmentally friendly, and so on. And we actually saw companies coming out of this because this program essentially helped a lot of technologies move out from the lab directly into startups and companies, of course, with a lot of support from customers as well. So for example, this particular company, Sedimac, which specializes in control-intensive products for small engines and powertrains for on-road and off-road applications, came out of this program from Professor Suryanarayan, who was a professor at IIT Bombay. And finally, he was able to actually take this and form this company. And the company is actually doing quite well. It's another thing I might mention is in the Indian context, we find that your ability to survive over a long period of time is quite important, because Sedimac, for example, is doing very well today, but it's almost 15, 20 years down the road. And I'm sure they've had lots of rocky times in the past in terms of surviving. So we have seen that this whole process of commercialization and taking something to the market, you need much more staying power in India than you probably need in most developed markets. The other challenge you also see is in the lab, often when you develop a technology, you don't know which is the best application. So technology transfer then is no longer a trivial issue. It also focuses on understanding which is the application and who is the customer who will really find value in this technology. So one of my favorite examples is again an old example from NCL, where Professor Shivram and his team developed a microencapsulation technology. Initially, they weren't very sure who was the best customer for this. So to find out, they actually went around talking to lots of people, making lots of presentations. Finally, Procter & Gamble, partly sort of through some serendipity, turned out to be the right customer. But P&G itself had to do a lot of work. They had to, work in terms of maybe for about 5 years before they could put this particular technology into use into their Downy formulation, which is basically a fabric softener. Their laundry science group had to be involved for several years. Finally, they also had to work with a small US company to scale it up. So I think one of the key challenges is understanding and identifying a company who is willing to go through this long cycle, who is willing to make the necessary investments, who is also willing to work with other partners like this small US company to go into the scaling up process. So I'm just underlining once again the importance of choosing the right customer and the right application who is really willing to make this investment of time and effort to really take the technology and make it work. What's also important is that even when the technology is licensed by a company, often that company might struggle to understand all the aspects of it. One of the interesting stories was when India first started making color picture tubes. The Indian companies involved imported and licensed this technology from companies in East Asia. But it took them a lot of time to be able to really match the productivity of the company from whom they sourced the technology. In fact, they finally had to upgrade productivity based on getting understanding from other licensees. So there's a lot of tacit knowledge which usually goes into technology transfer and absorption. Sometimes even the company or the organization which is licensing it out hasn't captured all that in explicit form, and then the licensee has to find a way of how do I understand this so that I can make it work well. Of course, this is true almost everywhere, but it's particularly true in India. Technology commercialization suffers quite a bit because of inadequacy of funding. As Kiran Majumdar said in this statement some years ago, that until Indian investors believe in discovery-led innovative startups, our aspiration to be high-value innovative biotech companies will be a myth. We will always be followers, not leaders, despite the huge opportunities we have. And here's looking at it from the other side, from Bugworks, who has been doing a lot of interesting work on creating drug-resistant, new drugs which are not bacteria-resistant and so on. And here you will see that in the US, it could take something like $500 million to bring a novel drug to the market. In India, it might take just $150 million. But even that kind of money is sometimes not easy to come by. So some of the other factors that seem to be important in going from lab to market, one is, of course, simply that you need to have a good way of appropriating the value out of the idea you have created. And that's, of course, a typical challenge many companies face, particularly if it's easily imitable, then you're not going to get the money out of it anyway. But even if it's not easily imitable, there could be issues of complementary assets and the owner of the complementary assets taking away the value. So this again matters a lot when you're looking at whom your potential licensee is, because you want somebody who will actually be able to get value out of the technology. And one other challenge we see in India is there's insufficient understanding that ultimately getting value out of technology is not just about IP. It's also about your product market actions. It's about your ability to continuously improve on the technology. I think many challenges that licensees face are related to this. With the fast change of technological progress, a typical licensee needs to continue to invest in improving the technology even after they think they have absorbed it. So there's no such thing as a one-time absorption. So it's good if your licensor actually continues to be interested in helping you, but even otherwise, the licensee really needs to continue to sharpen, improve the technology. The second box there, continual innovation, is important to get value out of this whole process. Okay, the final thing I'll just talk about briefly is what will help to make this work better. I think what will help to make this work better is early understanding of requirements. We saw during COVID that when there was better coordination, when different players in the ecosystem were willing to come together and share information, all of this helped to identify requirements quickly. And therefore, it was also easier for different players to develop technologies and for them to find suitable licensees or suitable partners who could commercialize them. So I think there's a strong case for better coordination mechanisms by the government, by industry associations, by incubators, by all the players in the ecosystem to facilitate early identification of emerging technological needs. Second important thing that will help is, of course, end-to-end support for the whole innovation process right down to commercialization. Luckily, at least in biotech, we've had BIRAC in India, which has been quite focused on this. It actually provides support across the entire value chain. And that's one of the reasons why biotech innovation in India has been perhaps more vibrant than some of the other sectors. Collaboration between innovators and large companies is also important to be successful in commercialization. We saw that during COVID when some of the developers of testing kits collaborated with some of the biggest vaccine manufacturers as well as some of the biggest reagent suppliers in order to be able to scale up their testing kit supplies and take them to the market. What's also useful is if you have large companies who are good at tech absorption. Tech absorption is a skill in itself. It's not something that a lot of companies are very good at. So some companies have tried to develop capabilities in that area. A good example is Eureka Forbes, which is a specialist player in the water purification business. It's India's perhaps largest supplier of home water purifiers. And what they realized at some point is that there are lots and lots of water purification technologies across the world. And many of the developers of those technologies are actually looking for good partners to take them to market. That's where Eureka Forbes came in. They developed the internal ability to absorb and commercialize new technologies, and they've worked with companies across the world to make that happen. The willingness of large companies to invest and take technologies to scale is another important thing that needs to be there to facilitate a lot more commercialization and tech transfer. We've seen some good, important examples of this in recent years. For example, Strand Life Sciences, which came out of the Indian Institute of Science as one of the earliest lab-based startups, sold their stake to Reliance Industries, India's largest company, of a couple of years ago, actually, in 2021. And we've seen other examples like Tejas Networks selling out to the Tatas. But by and large industrial firms in India have not shown a great deal of keenness in buying into some of these high-tech ventures. And that's another thing which will be required if we are to scale up and commercialize technologies effectively. At the individual inventor level, there are a lot of things that are important. You need to have more curiosity, the stamina to experiment, a lot of stamina to keep communicating your ideas, and of course, the stamina for collaboration. Unless you have these, you're not going to find your technology getting anywhere, particularly with the tech transfer process being quite a difficult and elaborate process. Unless you have some of these different types of stamina, it's not going to work. And of course, the individual characteristics of scientists also help. For example, you look at somebody like Bob Langer, he has very, very distinctive characteristics, a lot of excitement in changing the world, interest in at least thinking about how to benefit humanity, a lot of confidence in himself as an idea person, willingness to challenge conventional wisdom, strong self-belief, and of course, some good practices which really help make tech transfer easier. For example, quickly responding to proposals and interaction with the technology licensing office, giving feedback to very extensively with the ecosystem, sharing credit, etc. What I just try to present to you or share with you essentially is some ideas on how the entire Indian context really matters as far as licensing and so on is concerned. You need good licensees. You need licensees who can absorb technology. You need licensees who are willing to be patient and invest resources. They need to understand the technology well. They need to be able to absorb it. And I think to me, the biggest challenge in technology licensing may not be so much on the licensor side. They're probably doing what they can, reaching whichever TRL level they can in their lab. But finding larger organizations technologies out is really the biggest challenge that I see today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think you've covered a lot of ground, which we were not thinking of, because we were thinking of only the specifically about tech transfer. But you have also looked at a wider canvas, including just 1 minute. Am I visible or not? Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. So it's good that you have covered a lot of ground, which also goes beyond, including one perennial problem which many of us talk about, which is about should I? Okay. I think I'm getting some comments pop-ups here, which I don't know why it's coming up. But anyway, I think the fact that problems have to be picked well is something which we normally do not think forms as a part of the scope of the TTO, because you generally wait for an invention disclosure to come to you, but that's actually not so in focused research organizations. Like if you're a CSIR lab, it's possible to contribute even in the direction of defining problems rather than just only acting once the invention disclosure comes in. Are there any questions from the, we have maybe 5 minutes, Dr. Krishnan, and then I know you
Sure,
have.
that's fine.
Yeah. Any questions for Dr. Krishnan, please? Mike? Are there any questions which you would like to ask? Just take that mic. Yeah. Any questions from the audience? While that's happening, can I just ask you, you've also been reviewing a lot of research organizations and so on. When you review some of these organizations, and typically the question comes up about, the impact that these organizations are having, how is tech transfer results placed as very high in priority, or is it one amongst many others?
But I think, well, I'm not sure there's so much emphasis on tech transfer itself, but certainly I think more and more people are expecting to see impact in terms of commercial outcomes or social outcomes, one of the two. So they're either hoping to see some big impact in terms of a disease addressed, or in terms of some social challenge, whether it be livelihoods, poverty, education, whatever it is being addressed, or they're expecting to see a significant impact in terms of sales or employment and things like that. So while I wouldn't say there's so much focus on the tech transfer aspect by itself, certainly there's a lot of emphasis on impact and outcomes.
Yeah, that sort of aligns with some of the things that we have been talking about as well, as it being more about impact, and tech transfer activities actually creating vehicles to deliver impact, or at least facilitating impact.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
One other thing that's happening right now is an increasing share of this activity going in the direction of startups rather than the traditional licensing. And also large companies seem to be very often shying away from the traditional models. Even in the US, we are seeing that quite a bit, that many of these organizations who used to be well known for licensing, I mean, they're sort of seem to be, at least from my vantage point, dwindling in numbers. Is that something which is your observation as well? Because I think you've been studying a lot of this. Also, you had some very interesting graphs on the Indian pharma industry, which has built a lot of R&D capabilities internally. And has that changed their perspective on what they should focus on for, say, sourcing from academic and research labs?
So there were two questions you asked. Yeah. The first question was, what was it, Premad? I've lost that one.
I think the first question is got to do with primarily, sorry, let me come back to the second question. I'll come.
No, sorry, I remember the first one. Yeah. So
focus, yeah. And the other one was about basically in all the licensing that is happening currently. It's a lot of small company focus has increased, right, rather than large company focus.
So I think, Premnath, you have to go back and look at the history of industrial development in India. Most cases where companies in India try to in-license a technology, they licensed an established technology. They established something which was already commercially proven somewhere. And what they were trying to do is create production capacity in India. So often they license from an existing producer or from an existing technology that was well established in some other geography. So there were not so many uncertainties related to the technology itself. The technology had been shown to work somewhere or the other. It was more a question of adapting it to work in the Indian context with the materials, skills, etc., which were available here. What we are talking about today, and I suppose you're talking about in your workshop, is really commercializing and in-licensing new technologies that have not been perhaps proven at scale before. And Indian companies, to be honest, don't have that much experience in that domain except for a handful of them. And I think that's why I was harping on this point that if you're going to work with completely new technologies, if you're going to work with labs who have developed something, the recipient also needs certain high level of R&D and engineering capabilities in order to absorb and scale it up. It's not like an established technology where somebody can just give you drawings and tell you this is the process and presto, you can make it work with some minor adaptation. So that's a big difference. And honestly, you and I know Indian companies have not really been in that space for, and we except for a handful of them. So that I think is really a challenge. And that's one of the problems we are finding now. When our R&D capabilities in the labs are improving, we don't have so many recipients. And that's one of the reasons why the startup route sometimes looks like a better route to take something to market rather than, working with a company who may not have those absorption or even the R&D capabilities to make it work.
Yeah. There are two things I wanted to pose to you and ask you what should be a better approach for India. One approach for research institutions is that they just focus on path-breaking work, just create path-breaking IP, just like, say, what Professor Langer was saying, and look for licensing it out at very relatively low TRLs. Or the other approach where you get pushed very often is take it all the way till very high TRLs and then look for licensees. Which do you think is a better approach for India? And by the way, I mean, of course, organizational philosophies will differ in terms of what they wish to do, but this is something which is a constant push that people get, right? Which way do you think we should go?
It's a tough one. I think the second approach you are talking about, moving to a higher TRL, also makes better sense if you have some people in the group who are really interested in finally taking it to the market. Then moving to higher TRL levels also works much better. But otherwise, it's always going to be a struggle in the lab to take it very far down the chain. So you might be, I mean, of course, it depends on the technology, it depends on the domain and many other things. But if you're doing something really good, maybe as long as there are good recipients, you could even think of, letting go at an earlier stage. But I think to me, I mean, the broad answer to your question is in India, I'm almost firmly convinced that it's going to have to be startups or people moving out of the lab who are going to really have to take it and make it work. I don't have too much faith in large Indian companies making it happen.
Couple of data points here is one is that most of our researchers are interested in the early stage. They're not interested in the late stage. Another data point is that it takes a lot more money, 5x, 10x, to actually take it to higher TRLs.
So, which money is not available anyway. So,
and we won't be able to do too many of those. So in which case, I suppose one option is to just do high quality, invest all your resources in high quality early stage work. But then, of course, some people have to be willing to spin it out as well, right?
Sure.
Okay, great. So any questions there? There's one question there. Sorry, we were busy talking. Last question.
Thank you, Dr. Krishnan, for a very, very thoughtful, maybe a session, I will say. And extending Dr. Premnath's question and your discussion also on absorbance by industry. And with your experience of consulting Indian big corporates, a question is maybe for the audience, it's repeat. I ask it here to Dr. Kuhn also. Shall we look at industry pull more at national level when there is a lot of academic and laboratory push happening and searching for a taker? Shall we look at something like a platform at national level where industry actually comes? What do you think? What will be the reaction of industry and how, at what level of industry it can happen?
I don't know exactly what you mean by that platform.
Industry posing problems or asking for technology solutions, and then laboratories or research labs or academia coming back with solutions on that.
Yeah, see, I think I tried to make that point during my talk. See, early discovery of the challenges and problems is very important. If you come at the time when the industry is really facing that problem in a big way, by the time you solve it, it will be too late. So you really need to be working very closely with the industry to anticipate problems at a much earlier stage. In certain sectors, it could be even thanks to the government or Niti Aayog or someone actually having some foresight into what are going to be the emerging areas. That would really help. Because in a typical corporate situation, if they're facing a big problem today, unless it's a very small, some improvement, they are not going to give you enough time for you to come up with something to solve that. Yeah, in terms of a real process or product. Because by the time you do that, it will be a few years down the line and their competitiveness will get affected. So I really believe that the key for even for labs is to be a little bit ahead of the curve, talk to companies on a continuous basis, try to anticipate what are the challenges they'll face year or two down the line, so that you have adequate time to actually work on something that can meet that need. If the need is already expressed and they're facing the challenge today, I think in many cases it's too late. They will go and look for some other solution, or they will source something from outside India. They will find some other way of solving that problem.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I know that you have to leave. So thank you so much, Dr. Krishnan. Thanks a lot. Appreciate you taking the time. Let's give him a round of applause.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot. Yeah, sure. And if any of you have any questions, just feel free to mail me. I'm happy to answer. Thank you.